phenomenon that's very motivating is emotions. So in this segment, we will focus on emotions. Now, what are emotions? Well, first of all, they reflect your evaluation of typically some outside stimulus or maybe even your own feelings. But with emotions, the key is that it's your body that reacts. We talk about feelings, that's more in the mind, it's more thoughtful. The body responds in emotions. In fact, there's a reason that emotion and the word motion are so closely linked, because movement and emotion are typically coupled together in important ways. Emotions are our automatic bodily responses to things in the outside world or to our feelings. Emotions are very motivating. We can talk about positive emotions and negative emotions. Negative emotions like fear or disgust are thought to be associated with evolutionary advantages. So in the bottom left there is a picture of a man showing disgust. Blech. Now notice that disgust involves the tongue often going out. It's half a vomit, right? That sounded gross. But anyway, disgust is thought to benefit us by keeping us away from things that might make us sick. So if I ate something disgusting, I got to get rid of it, right? Things that disgust us tend to be things like a cesspool, something that might have a lot of bugs in it that would make us sick. So that's an evolutionary response. Fear is another one. We've talked about fear before when we talked about the flight or fight reaction. When you're afraid of something, your first reaction is to get the heck out of there or stand there and fight. But you have to have a body response. Notice both of these are very body-based and they both have an advantage, right? Fear is when you pool all of your body's resources to make some dramatic response to a phenomenon that could, really hurt your well-being. Positive emotions, on the other hand, are understood differently. Positive emotions such as happiness seem to be associated with homeostasis, when we're in that right equilibrium, where we have everything we need and all is right with the world. Right? Emotions are critically important for decision making. Now, in the old days, when I went to graduate school, they used to teach us that the emotional part of the brain was separate from the cognitive part of the brain, so that decision making, good decision making at least, didn't involve emotions. Now we know that that's completely wrong, that every single decision that you make has an emotional component to it. Whether you're voting or deciding what socks to put on in the morning, emotion plays a role in that. How do we know this? In part from studies of people who have suffered brain damage that make it impossible for them to feel emotions. If you ask someone with this damage, and this research has been done by Damasio, who's now at USC, if you ask someone with this sort of prefrontal cortex damage to make a decision, they can't. They can list all the different options. So you might ask them, well, where do you want to go to dinner tonight? And they'll say, well, we could go here or there, or here or there. But they can't decide. They can't select one, because it turns out the option that we select requires some emotional processing. As Damasio said, we are not thinking machines that feel, rather we are feeling machines that think. So Damasio says it's all about emotion. Well, if it's all about emotion, what happens if you suppress your emotions? It turns out that people who suppress their emotions all the time, they have all sorts of psychological and health-related problems. It turns out suppressing your emotions is unhealthy, both biologically and psychologically. So people who suppress their emotions experience higher rates of heart disease. They have lower functioning immune systems. They're more likely to get cancer. And there are a number of reasons proposed to explain why suppressing your emotions has such a negative impact on even your lifespan. One interpretation is that when you suppress your emotions, you're not dealing with them. And as a result of not dealing with them, you're going to have to find some other way to cope. So I don't know about you, but I have certainly dealt with stressful situations, not by thinking about how stressed out I am, but by grabbing a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream and indulging. Right? That's an example of a poor coping technique. Another reason that people who suppress their emotions have such health problems is that suppression is literally physically stressful on your body. And as a result of that, you have increased blood pressure, lower immune system function, your fight or flight response gets triggered more easily. And the failure to express emotions causes people to sort of get stuck psychologically with whatever it is they're working on. Without expressing the emotions, without sharing what your deep feelings are, it's hard to get beyond those feelings. How many emotions do we have? Well, the answer depends on who you talk to. But in general, psychologists think there's somewhere between 6, 7, 8, 9 discrete individual emotions. And how do we know this? Well, some of this work comes from the work that a fellow by the name of Paul Ekman did, way back in the 70s, where he took pictures of people expressing different emotions with their faces. And then he asked other people to look at those faces and say, what is each of these people feeling? And he found out, okay, we're really good at that. You can make some guesses here. So the first woman in the upper left, if you guessed what her emotion was, you'd probably say anger, right? The guy in the middle on the top, fear. On the right, disgust. Surprise, down in the bottom left. In the bottom in the middle, happiness. And in the bottom right, sadness, right? It's very easy. What was interesting for Ekman is he took pictures like this and he went around the world asking people to identify the emotions that were expressed in these people's faces. And it turns out all over the world, people interpret facial expressions similarly. We now know that it's not identical, but it's very similar. Now, emotions are not taught to us. There's something we just have. And we know this from studies of babies. So babies make all of the basic facial expressions that adults do. And you can look at babies' faces and see, for example, joy, anger, and interest in that top row. Now, I said that people from different cultures could recognize happy faces and angry faces with equal accuracy. But it turns out that different cultures have rules on when particular emotions can be expressed. For example, in the United States, we are very expressive, especially negative emotions. It's okay to show that you're angry or frustrated or sad in public. Now, in Japan, there are rules against the expression of negative emotions when you're in public. Private, everybody expresses emotions similarly. In public, there are these differences. So what happens in Japan when someone is feeling a negative emotion, they have to cover it up, so they smile, which to an American can be very confusing. So different cultures don't change the way people feel emotionally, they just change the rules on how emotions can be expressed in public. Now, there's something really cool about emotions. So we feel like expressing an emotion is just about communicating that emotion to other people. But it turns out when you express an emotion on your face, it's easier for you to feel the feeling of that emotion in your body. This is called the facial feedback effect. And it was done with these really creative set of studies where they had people solve, I think it was math problems, while they held a pen or pencil in their mouth in one of two ways. Either they told people to hold a pencil in their mouth this way. And that, when I do that, it simulates a smile. Right? Smile. They also had the other half of the subjects, the picture isn't shown here, but they had those subjects hold the pencil in their mouth like this. That's not a happy face. At the end of the problem-solving set, people were simply asked, how do you feel? And it turns out people who put the pen in their mouth like this felt significantly happier than the people who had placed the pen in their mouths like this. Cool, huh? So it turns out if you want to feel happier, smile. If you want to feel angrier, make an angry face. Emotions have different components to them. There is a body component, physiological arousal. There's a behavioral component. Happy people act differently than sad people. And there's a cognitive component. We have some cognitive understanding of why we're feeling what we're feeling in a particular situation. So if you look at the facial expression and the behavior and the cognitive expression, you can differentiate the emotions this way. So for example, in anger, there's a high physiological arousal, right? An angry person, lots of energy. And a sad person, very low energy, right? Slouching shoulders. People who are very sad or clinically depressed literally talk more slowly than people who aren't depressed. At a behavioral level, angry people have tense muscles and ballistic actions, whereas sad people have slow actions and little muscle tension. Angry people determine what caused my anger. If you hadn't cut me off. At a cognitive level, sad people feel unappreciated, unloved, unsupported, unlucky. Right? So you can differentiate between the various emotions in that way. Now, traditionally, in an introduction to psychology course, the professor would spend quite a bit of time talking about the different theories of emotion. And I'm not going to do that because they're all kind of wrong. But there are some theories that say, first you have the bodily response, and then you have the understanding of it. Other researchers say first you have the understanding of the emotion and then you have the body response. Some theories say you have them at the same time. So we can just dismiss all of those. And why do I dismiss them all? Well, there's a really smart guy at NYU named Joe Ledoux, and he said, you know what? Emotions are probably processed by different systems in different ways. So for example, fear is a very rapid emotion, and it is controlled in large part by an old part of the brain called the amygdala. On the other hand, love or guilt, amongst researchers who consider those to be emotions, that's not fast like fear, right? If I see a snake, I jump in fear immediately. When I feel love, it's a much slower feeling, right? It comes on slow and hangs around longer. And the thought is that probably love and guilt have more cognitive processes than fear, which is kind of automatic. Okay, come back and we'll talk about happiness and how important it is.